Hiya everyone, it's Rosie from Sew Over It here, and I am here today to show you how to sew up our wonderful Boxy Toiletries bag. So this is going to be a sew along that shows you every single step for sewing up the Boxy Toiletries bag, which is this really cute little boxy bag with a zip, and it is fully lined. You've got these lovely tabs at the end, and we show you how to create that gorgeous little boxy shape. And I'm saying Boxy Toiletries bag, but mine is actually my boxy knitting bag. I've already made one of these that fits my toiletries beautifully. So this one is for storing my little knitting projects. So if you're going to sew along with us, you can get the pattern on our website. We always have some offers going on, so have a look in the description box below to see what offer we've got for the Boxy Toiletries bag pattern at the moment. Supplies wise, you don't need that much. This is definitely a project that can be made from your scraps, and that is exactly what I've done here. So you're going to need something for your outer fabric, your lining, you're going to need some interfacing, all of which I'll talk about a little bit in the next step. And then other than that, sewing machine, obviously, iron, two important things. You'll want some pins, some thread. I've used coordinating thread with my outer fabric, so you can see you've got some top stitching detail. So have a little think about what colour you want that top stitching to be and choose your thread accordingly. A hand needle, there's an opportunity to do a tiny bit of hand sewing, so a hand needle if you want to do some hand sewing. Fabric marker, something that's going to go away, so either one that goes away with heat or one that goes away with time, or something like chalk that just brushes off. You're going to want some snips and some big scissors. Pins, did I mention pins? We need pins. There's a little bit of sewing where it helps to have a little extra helping hand in the way of a hump jumper, and I'll explain that as I get round to it. If you don't have an official hump jumper, I did not, then just a rolled up piece of fabric will be absolutely fine. Unpicker, unfortunately, you might need an unpicker. That's cool. Always have one close by. You'll need your regular machine foot, but also a zip foot as well. And that goes to say, I can't forget that you need a 14-inch regular zip. I have used a larger zip in this process, so you'll see how to work with that, but you definitely don't want one that's smaller than 14 inches. But once you've got all those bits together, then let's get sewing. So the first thing we're going to do is get all our supplies together, obviously. So what have I got here? So for the Boxy Toiletries bag, you need an outer fabric and a lining fabric, and also some interfacing here. As you can see from the pattern, it's really quite a small pattern piece, so quite often you might find that you've got scraps in your stash that will work really well for this, and that is exactly what I've done. So I've got a canvas here for the outer that originally came from one of our samples, the Frankie jacket that Lena wore, and that has been sitting in a box in our office for probably about 2 years. So I'm happy it's getting used now. So I've got a canvas for the outer, and then actually I've got for the inner of sort of, I think it's a viscose or maybe even a cotton lawn for the lining, and this was my Jemima jumpsuit that I wore. So I'm happy that they're getting another life, and they go quite well together. You've got this nice mustard, which is going to look really nice. So fabric wise, you kind of think what you want to use your toiletries bag for, because I say toiletries bag, but it really could be quite a lot of different things. It could be, I'm going to use this one actually as a knitting bag, or it could be a gift for someone to use. You kind of want to think, do you want it to be kind of soft and floppy and in a nice way, or do you want it to be like boxy and hold its shape? And that will sort of determine what sort of fabric you want to use. Obviously, if you're using something from your stash, you kind of use what you've got. And that similarly goes for interfacing, because we need some interfacing too. And I've got a bunch of different interfacing here. I've got a sort of general medium weight one, which would work really well in giving it just a little bit of a helping hand in that stability. I've got a woven interfacing that we had in the office as well, and that's a similar weight. It's just, you might be able to see the difference in that this one is non-woven. You can't really see any threads running through that. It's all just sort of one piece, whereas this one is woven like a fabric is woven. which this would also work perfectly well as well. It's sort of medium. That's going to complement my canvas. I think the one thing you don't want to do is use a really light fabric and try and make it really structured with a really heavy interfacing. Often they won't work together very well and they kind of don't look very nice. It might be that the interfacing sort of tries to pull away from the lighter weight fabric. So you kind of have to lean a little bit into what the fabric's telling you to do. So for example, I wouldn't try and interface this one with something really heavy and make it the outer, because just wouldn't work really. It wouldn't work. But with something that's already got a little bit of structure, you can then marry it up with a similar interfacing to sort of double the oomph that it's got, if that makes sense. That's absolutely fine. And if you wanted a really soft toiletries bag, you could use something like this, but I would use maximum of sort of medium weight interfacing, even just a lightweight interfacing, and you just have to lean into the fact that it's going to be a soft bag. The other option that I have got, this would make it really structured, is something called Decaville Light, which is, I think, officially a sort of bag weight, bag making interfacing. Again, it's fusible. We can iron it on, and you can see it's just so solid. It makes things a little bit trickier to sew with, so just bear that in mind. But this would give you a really sort of solid, properly boxy toiletries bag that would stand up on its own very well. So that is an option too, and you can get that. Quite often we sell it in our online shop, but also at general haberdashers as well. So I think I'm going to go for this one, which is my generic non-woven tailor's interfacing. If I've got enough, looking at that. Oh yes, I will have enough. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to get rid of these. And I'm going to give my fabric a press just before I cut out, and then it is sort of nice and neat, and you can make sure you're cutting really accurately. So make sure you've got lots of water in your iron. Fold out your fabric. I press this from the wrong side actually, just to avoid getting any marks on it. And iron out those creases. I feel like my iron's not very hot yet. These cordless irons are very good for filming, obviously, because then we don't need the cord everywhere. But they're a little bit more finicky than your usual irons. Sometimes it doesn't heat up as well as I want it to. Hopefully, if I tell it to heat up again, it'll warm up. But it's doing the job. We're getting some of these folds out. So what we're going to do is going to iron these fabrics, and then we're going to pin our pattern on. You might be able to see from my pattern, I have printed this out on an A4 printer and then stuck it together. Obviously people have strong feelings about this, and for big dressmaking patterns it can be a pain in the neck to do it that way, but for a project like this it is so quick and easy. I think that was maybe 5 pieces of paper, if that, all together. It's very quick and easy to do on your home printer. And it's not the sort of project that you're going to cut out loads of different sizes as well. So you can just do it once and have it forever. Ooh. That is my outer fabric ironed. And then my lining. This is going to be really cute. Oh, there's been some overlocking going on the side there. I think I was testing out my overlocking thread on it. So yeah, as I said, I think I'm going to use this as a knitting bag. I know both Chloe and Alma from the Sew Over It team have made some for presents as well, and then people can just use them for what they please. It's a great size for toiletries. That's why it's a toiletries bag, sort of first and foremost. But it is a really good size for crafts in general. But even like popping scraps into. I always find I have scraps everywhere, but if I have somewhere to put them, then I do actually tidy up. So that would be a really nice use, and it's quite nice having a pretty bag instead of just a bin in the sewing room. Okie doke. I think that's pretty good. Let's get to cutting out. So I'm going to cut out my outer first. Just picked up some threads. And if you're using scraps, actually, it's a good thing to think about the grain line, because you might not necessarily have a full piece of fabric. So on this one, I've got the selvage still here, which I can use to line up. And you can see that if I'd have lined up this edge, then my fabric would have been off grain. But because I've got this tiny bit of selvage, I can use that to make sure I'm still using the grain properly. So for the main body, you're going to need to cut 2 of everything. Look at that, how's that for perfect size? I'll just pop some pins in the corner. It's a really great project for if you're just starting out on sewing. It's sort of one step up from doing just a standard little bag with a zip in it. But you'll still kind of learn some new skills and learn how, I guess, shapes are created as well. How we're going to create that boxy shape. But it'll just give you a chance to sort of test your zip. Oh, hang on a second. Forgot my end tabs. I need to be a bit more cleverer than that. 1 second, we're going to take this off. So there's your first tip. Make sure you've got all your pattern pieces for which piece of fabric you're using. Okay, let's shimmy this up to the top there. And then I've got, yeah, space down there for my tabs. Perfect. Too busy nattering and not enough paying attention. But yeah, if you are a more advanced sewer, then it's just a nice little project for a Saturday afternoon. And sometimes I feel like I've got quite a lot of sewing to do at the moment, and sometimes the sojo wanes, doesn't it, a little bit, and little projects like this can just get you back into it, because you kind of don't have to think too much. You don't have to worry about any fitting. You can just make something pretty and cute and be proud of yourself for making something new. But you don't have to, there's no pressure, basically. So it's a really nice project for that. Okay, so cutting out. I tend to keep my scissors to the left of a pattern piece. For me, that means I cut more neatly. I know that other people, I know that Julie, who used to teach with Sew Over It, still does on Stitch School, and also does quite a lot of pattern cutting with us, prefers to cut with her scissors on the right of the pattern piece. And I think there's something to be said for that. You can get a little bit closer. I think my scissors are a little bit dull there. But personally, for me, I prefer the other way. So, to be honest, try it out. See which way you get a neater cut, because I think it's probably all to do with the specific way that you use scissors. And if something works for you, then that's the right way. So go ahead, you want to cut 2 of these out in your main fabric and 2 of them out in your lining fabric, and then and 2 out in your interfacing as well, and we'll iron the interfacing on, and then after that we'll start sewing. Okay, so first steps is to iron on our interfacing. So again, what you've got here, you've got 2 of your outer fabric, you've got 2 of your lining fabric, and then we've just got 1 of the tabs, which we split into 2. So we're going to put the interfacing onto the outer fabric. We're going to put that onto the wrong side, obviously. So with this fabric, it's got quite an obvious twill weave. So that's that diagonal kind of pattern in there that isn't as obvious on the wrong side. So I definitely want this lovely twill weave on the outside. So let's get one of our pieces and then get some interfacing. It's definitely, I don't know how I do it almost every time. It's my toxic trait in sewing is to burn interfacing. And I always forget to sort of either check whether the interfacing can handle the heat of the iron or not. So I would recommend just checking a little bit in the corner and checking it's okay. This feels all right, because this is quite a sturdy interfacing. It's not shrinking away. But definitely if you're using lightweight interfacing, you might want to turn your iron down a bit, or you can use a pressing cloth as well to press it on. but this is handling it. I'm doing it with quite a light touch, just because I know that I'm a nightmare and usually ruin it the first time I put it on. But no, this is working out fine. It's quite gentle. You don't want to be using lots of force and sort of rolling your iron around. It's more of a sort of up and down motion if you want to press a little bit harder. Let's see, is that's fusing quite nicely. I think that's pretty much on. And hopefully we can see, yeah, that does feel quite different. The difference in the uninterfaced one to the interfaced one. It's definitely got that bit more structure, but it's still going to create quite a nice soft bag. So let me just quickly do the other one. Make sure I'm on my wrong side, so it's the side where the twill is less obvious. And then my interfacing, of course, goes with the kind of bobbly, fusible side down. That's another thing you don't want to do when you're interfacing, is accidentally iron oh, see, it heated up. It heated up, I told you. So I'm just going to turn it down a little bit. Nope, that's still too hot. Let me just... Nope. Turn that down. I knew it. Maybe it's not me. Maybe it's my iron playing up. Okay, this feels a bit better. I think actually it just wasn't at full temperature before. No, it is. There we go. That's going on all right now. So yes, you also don't want to iron with your interfacing with the glue side up accidentally, because obviously then all the sticky stuff gets stuck onto your iron, which can be a pain to get off. You can get iron cleaner, and I have seen people clean their irons, I think, with paracetamol. You get your tweezers and hold paracetamol and rub it, and you can see mine's got quite a little bit of sticky stuff on, and actually a bit more from where I just did that. And the paracetamol like bubbles and burns all this off. I have seen it done. I've not done it myself. You can get iron cleaner as well, which will do the same job, but it's fairly strong smelling, so do that with an open window nearby. Okay, I think after that drama that is on. If you do end up with something like this, that's absolutely fine. Just as long as it's, you can see this is well within my seam allowance, so that's not going to affect the project at all. That's all right. If you end up with a patch in the middle, you might want to either try and pull it off and put some new interfacing on, or patch a little bit. I think that's the joy with a project like this, and if you're using non-woven interfacing, is that you can kind of patch it a little bit. And if you've only got scraps of interfacing as well, you can do that as well, little bits all over. I've definitely done that before. Okay, those two guys are interfaced and ready to go. My lining is not going to be interfaced, but now we're going to press the tab. And this tab is going to be at the end of our toiletries bag. And it's just a really nice thing to hold on to. So let me just slack my iron up again, because I know this fabric can take a bit of heat. And what we're going to be doing is pressing it in half, opening it out, and then pressing these sides into the middle again, and it will fold together to become our tab like that. Okay, first step is to press in half. Until you've got a nice crease that you can use to then press it to the middle. So the trick here is to press this folded edge without pressing away that first line that you pressed, if I can say pressed any more times. So I'm just using the edge of the iron to go along the fold, but I'm not actually ironing the whole piece. And the same with the other side, bringing it to the middle. Oh, it's hot. Either be careful or get yourself sort of some asbestos hands, like I think I have from years of sewing. Years of ironing, more right. And then the last bit is that we're going to fold that all together so those raw edges are now inside, and give it one final press. And what we're going to do for our first bit of sewing is to top stitch this and give it a nice top stitching detail. So what it will do is it will secure this open edge down, but we'll also do a matching line of top stitching on the other side, just because everything kind of looks nicer when it's mirrored. So once you've got that pressed, we can go and start sewing. Okay, we're on to the good stuff now. Let's get sewing. So we've got our folded tab piece. I'm just going to pop some pins in to keep that folded edge together. I'm going to put them in lengthways just because I don't know why. It seems the right thing to do. I think it's because my fabric's quite bulky, and having them that way would just sort of create a bit more bulk and trickiness. So as I said, we're going to top stitch along both of these edges. First, I'm going to do the one to hold these two open edges to sew those together, and then the other one. And when I'm top stitching, I'm going to put my stitch length up to 3, because visually a little bit of a bigger stitch length sort of looks nicer on top stitching. And also I find that if you're top stitching a slightly bigger stitch length, kind of hides more wobbles, so you've got a little bit of a safety net there as well. And then to line up, to find a distance where I want to top stitch, I'm going to move my needle across, because on this machine I can move it from side to side, and I am going to look to be, I mean, it's between 1 and 2 millimeters from the edge. You can choose whatever distance you like, and it might be that your needle doesn't move, so in which case you would want to move your fabric about to find something for it to line up with, which works for you and your needle and your position. So I'm just going to, because it is a bit bulky, I'm going to start, I don't know, I'm probably about 1 centimetre in from the edge actually, and reverse back rather than starting right on the edge. If you can give yourself long tails of thread as well, I've just threaded this so they are quite long, then that gives you something to hold on to. I'll show you in a second as well, so that if yours gets stuck, you can kind of hold a little bit of tension on your threads once you've sewn a few stitches, and that can help it get through the machine. So I'll just go back to where I wanted to sew. That looks good. And I'm just going to back stitch, she says. There we go. And I'm really close to the end now, so I'm actually going to hold on to these threads that I did the first stitches with, and I've got a bit of tension on there, and as I go forward, that's just going to help me, there we go, and help me in the sewing machine get a better grip. So the needle I'm using is a 990. I think it's a 90. It's a heavier weight needle, and just because I know I'm using canvas, I'm going to sew through canvas and interfacing and a zip tape, so I want a needle that can handle that. And I know my lining's quite light, but actually that doesn't really matter if you're using a heavier needle for the lining. I just want to make sure that I won't break my needle going through all these thick bits. There we go. So hopefully now you can see I've got a nice line of top stitching on there, and I'm just going to repeat that with the other side. So I'm going to go in the other direction so I don't have to change my needle, and then I know that they're exactly the same distance from the edge. So again, I've got myself a bit of a thread there. I'm going to start about 1 centimetre in, lining up with the same position. Reverse first, and then hold on to this back thread. Ooh. And give it a tug. There we go. It just needs that tension to get going. Sew all the way along there. And you can do a reverse at the back. You don't really need to, because this will be caught in seam allowance. But there we go. Top stitch down both sides there. So trim off your threads as you go, either with your enormous scissors like I've got, or you can use some small ones as well. Nice to have some little snips by your side when you're sewing. Okay, let me get this guy out to the side. Oh, it's a beast. So this is actually going to create 2 tabs. So all we're going to do now is snip it in half. Just going to fold it in half there roughly, give it a little finger press, and with my big scissors, pop that through. And those are our 2 tabs done. And the next thing we're going to do is start putting in the zip. Okay, so we're going to put the zip in, which is the next step, and it's kind of like the biggest step of the whole project. So once you've done this, it feels so much quicker. So I've got my zip here. You need a 14-inch zip. I did not have a 14-inch zip in my stash. I've got a 15-inch zip. It may well be the case. If you're making stuff out of bits that you've got in your stash, then it's quite often that you don't have exactly the right thing. So I will show you what to do. I wouldn't recommend doing it with a shorter zip, but if you've got a longer zip, then it totally works as well. Especially if it's plastic teeth. A caveat that you probably wouldn't want to do this with a zip with metal teeth. If you've got a metal teeth zip, you'd want it to be the exact right length because you don't want to be sewing over that at any point. So we're going to pin our zip to the top of our outer fabric. So it's right sides together. The right side of your outer is obviously the one without the interfacing on, and the right side of the zip is the side where the zip pull is really obvious. And I just tend to get the zip pull out of the way, and then it doesn't get in the way of your pinning. So we're going to start our sewing at 1.3 centimeters from the shorter edge. So I'm going to line up the edge of my zip tape right at this corner. That's the wrong way. That's the right way. There we go. The edge of my zip tape right at this corner. And the other side of the long edge of my zip tape is going to run along the top there. And I'm going to put my pins in perpendicular, parallel to the zip tape. I always get that one mixed up. Like so. And I'm just going to check, because I've got this metal bit here, that at 1.3, there we go. Yes, that's beyond 1.3, so that's fine. I'm not at any point going to have to sew over that, which is really good. So pins along there. And then whilst we're here, we're going to get our lining, and that is going to go right sides down, which is this way. This fabric is a bit tricky, but the pink is much brighter on one side, so that's going to be my right side. So that is right side to right side, so wrong side up. And what we're going to do is we're going to put that exactly on top of your outer, and we're going to transfer those pins one by one. I would say here, put in as many pins as you need to. There are no prizes for sewing with less pins. And your zip tape probably is going to be quite obvious. Mine definitely will, because it's in blue. It's a complementary zip rather than in yellow. So I want to make sure it's going to be sitting really nicely when I sew. So I'm going to use plenty of pins. So we're just transferring them from the zip to the lining, so all 3 layers are pinned together, and like that. I can fit in another one there, why not? And then we're going to be sewing all 3 layers together. But I did say, didn't I, that we're going to be sewing from 1.3 centimeters at each end. So I'm just going to mark that in first. I've got a little fabric marker here that comes off with heat. That's very handy, and I think it's going to be really tricky to see on my navy fabric, which is really helpful. Oh, it's not too bad. I can see it. You guys might not be able to see it. I'll put in a line there, and 1.3 from the other end as well. I might put in an extra pin. This isn't actually on my zip, but it's just giving me a little heads up, especially for where I've got to stop. There and there, just in case I can't see my pen markings. So I'm going to sew from this pin here all the way to this pin. Along here, I've got a zip foot on my machine now, so that is a little bit smaller, and it means you can go close up to that bump in the zip, whereas a regular foot, it would struggle with all the different layers. So let's let's move this bad boy across. And I'm going to start a little bit ahead of my 1.3 and reverse back up to it. I am aware that I did have that metal bit at the end of my zip, so I think I can feel it there. I'm just going to go quite slow. The last thing you want to do if you've got a metal bit on your zip is sew over it, because it'll break your needle. It might hurt your machine. So I'm actually going to put my speed down. I like a speedy sew, but I will pop this down for now. I'm pressing the backwards button and just slowly going back up to that 1.3 mark. One more stitch. There we go. This pin out. And then slowly past where that metal bit is again. I've gone very close to this pin head, so lift my foot up to get that out. But in general, you do want to take your pins out sort of as late as you can, because they're keeping the zip really nice and neat. I'm also going to use this finger to kind of butt up against the zip, and then that hopefully when I've taken the pins out gives it a little bit more support as well, because obviously it's going to be quite visible. There we go, sewing along there. Another thing is that if you're using a light fabric like I am for your lining, it can handle a little bit different from if you're using a heavier outer fabric. So it feels like I might end up, I've got a little bit of excess in my lining. It's just kind of floatier and slippier, so it's sort of wafting about a bit more than the very stable lining. So just bear that in mind as you go along. That's a very normal thing to happen. It doesn't mean you've done something wrong. Try and ease. I have got a little bit extra there, so I'm going to pop some pins in. See if this works. I'm going to go really close to that pin. That's good. Sometimes if you've got a bit of excess fabric, putting in loads of pins just helps you be able to handle it rather than it chasing it down all the way down your seam. I'm going to do one more. You sort of feel where you've got the excess and split it with a pin. And that does seem to be helping. But also, this is well, it's not something you're going to wear. It doesn't have to fit. It's an easy project. So if you've chased a little bit of ease down your seam and you end up with a little bit more at the bottom on your lining, I'd say just chop it off. Chop it off. So I'm just coming up to my pin there that's marking where I've got to stop. It's helpfully moving a little bit. That was good. So I'm just going to go slowly up to it and then reverse back again. So what we end up with is a line of stitching like this, where you've got your outer, that's my outer, you've got your lining, and then if I open it up in between, we've got our zip. And you just want to make sure, obviously you want to sew close to your zip tape, but not so close that you can't move your zip. And that is what it's going to look like on the outside. Love that colour combination. And that's on the inside. So we sewed this all wrong sides together. We're just going to flip over to the right side now. I might do it one at a time. So I've got my lining out and I'm just going to give it a press all over for one, but then up to the zip tape as well, like so. Just pulling it a little bit taut so you can give it a really nice clean press. And obviously be really careful if you iron the zip pull and then touch it, because it will get hot. And I have made that mistake before. So then pulling onto my zip a little bit, and then I'm going to bring it this way and fold my outer out. As my outer's a little bit of a heavier fabric, again I'm giving it a little bit more of a tug. And then just iron that seam. I really like this, it looks so nice. And then all we're going to do next is the exact same process with the other outer and lining pieces. So let's do this again. We've got our other outer, mine which is covered in threads. And this time, how am I going to do this? I'm going to have my outer down like that. And I'm going to lay this with the outer right sides together, lining up this zip tape with the outer there. Obviously, you want to make sure that they are aligned. So I'm lining up the outer that I've already sewn with the edge of the other outer piece that I've got. Actually, let me get rid of that zip pull there. Nope. So making sure they're aligned at the end. So you want to align this edge and align this edge of the zip. And once I put my first pin in, then I might move that zip pull out of the way. It's handy to keep it closed at this point. So you know things are going to line up nicely. And also when you're putting your pins in, think about how you're going to sew this. So I'm going to sew it this way round on my machine, coming in this way. So I want my pins facing that same way, so it's easy to pull out. But I find it easier to pin with it in this direction. Okay, so let's undo that and do the same process as we did before. Pop in those pins in. So you might have seen we've got quite a lot of sew-alongs on YouTube now. I think they started in earnest during COVID, when Lisa would do lots and lots of sew-alongs from home. When everyone was stuck at home and wanted something to do on their lunch breaks, we'd be there with sew-along. But we've also got more popping up. I've done one with our Ultimate Wrap skirt pattern, which is such a nice, easy pattern to do, especially if you're a beginner. It's definitely a really good first garment pattern because there's so little fitting and it's nice and easy to sew, and you can kind of give yourself a challenge with a tricky fabric, or you can do it in a cotton and keep it nice and easy. But yeah, there's lots and lots on there. But of course, if you do like learning, a big part of our lives is Stitch School, which is our online, it's our online classroom, we like to call it. So Sew Over It started life as shops. So we did create patterns for sure, but not quite as many as we do now. And a big part of our life was teaching. So we'd teach almost every evening. And at the point when we had 2 shops, that was almost every evening and both weekend days in 2 shops. So there's a lot of teaching. And that's what we've grown on, and that's what we love doing, is imparting a bit of sewing knowledge, getting people together that love sewing, sort of creating a community. And Stitch School is now that. So as you can see, I've just done what we did before, was I've pinned along there. I've got my 3 layers together. I need to mark my 1.3 in for where I'm starting and stopping. There's a pen mark, which I'm going to help myself out with a pin mark as well as a pen mark. I've got a little bit of excess. Hopefully you can see I've not cut this very nicely. So I'm just going to trim that down. Floaty, floaty fabric and heavy scissors. There we go, 1.3 at that end as well. And a little pin to help. So again, we're starting at 1 pin, sewing to the other pin through all 3 layers with the zip sandwich in between. If you haven't got room for your zip pull down at the end like I have, then you might need to move it about whilst you're sewing so it doesn't get under the foot, but that is fine. Just stop, move the zip pull when it gets in the way, and then start again. So let's get to the sewing machine for this one. So starting ahead of my 1.3 mark, just make sure my needle's in the right position. There we go. A little back stitch, and then along here. Again, keeping my fingers close to that zip, just so I'm keeping it nice and straight once I take the pins out. Ooh. Again, I am chasing down a teensy bit of ease here. Let's pop another pin in. See if that helps. Up a little bit, still there, that little guy. I think that might have got it. There we go, and I'm just coming up to my 1.3. Marking and reverse. Take that off the machine, and we're going to go and press this in the same way that we did before. So here we've got our toiletries bag. What it looks like now. Looks like a bit of a nightmare, but I promise you it is not. It's going to look great, and hopefully we can see if we close the zip. Are you kidding me? No. If we close the zip, I will give it a press, but I just want to have a look at it first. Oh, I am loving this. Really liking these colours. And then the inside, it's going to be this. And then I'm going to wear it with my Jemima, and I might even borrow the Frankie sample, and then it would match both ways. And I love it. Okay, but first let's press this. So I think I was saying about teaching. And that, yes, I grew up on teaching it, so it's what we love to do. And even in the patterns, so I write the pattern instructions, and it's one of my favourite things to do is to make construction a bit interesting. So not only are you making something you love, but you might be learning a new technique or a new way of construction whilst you are sewing up your new make as well. So I'm a bit of a geek like that, and it comes out in the instructions. But if you do like learning through video classes and with someone by your side in your sewing room, or where a lot of us sew on your dining room table, things like that, then Stitch School's a really great place, because we have so many. I think at the time of recording, we have over 240 classes on there and over 40 PDF patterns as well. And that is only getting bigger. So you can subscribe to Stitch School. So we've got different content. We've got tutorials that are small little things that might be like putting in a zip or how to do a specific adjustment, and that is just £5 a month. And we always have links in our instructions now moving forward and in our most recent patterns. So if there's a tricky bit of a pattern, it's very likely that we will have a tutorial for that, and there'll be a link in your instruction booklet that takes you right there. But before we think about that, let's do our next step, which is to get our pen, to get our little seam gauge. Mine has fallen off the table, bear with me. To get our little seam gauge, I would really recommend one of these actually. It is my favourite sewing tool. It's a seam gauge. I got mine in my sewing machine, so mine's a Benina. I think it's the fanciest seam gauge I've ever seen, and I hold on to this with my life. And it's got this little red marker that goes up and down, so if you're measuring you can just line it up, and it's just so easy to see all your measurements because you've got that little red marker. So I'm going to slide that up to 1.3, and we're going to mark in that mark again. This is on your outer, and definitely I'm doing this with a removable pen because we don't want this to be seen afterwards. So I'm going to do a little mark, 1.3 on both sides, and what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch on this zip, and it secures everything in place, but also it looks nice. That's mostly what top stitching is for. It's a bit of securing and a bit of looking nice. So let's move over to the sewing machine again, and we'll do that top stitching. So make sure you've changed your foot. We're going back to a regular machine foot, and I'll just pop my needle in the middle for now. Pop my stitch length up to 3, which I said was my preferred top stitching length. You may have your own. And then you're going to be top stitching through all your layers, through your outer, your zip tape and your lining. My lining is floaty, so I'm actually just going to chuck in a couple of pins away from my top stitching, just to stop that accidentally folding up, because that's definitely something that could happen. And then you could sew it all together, it'd be a big mess. I'm also going to undo my zip, so I'm just working on this side and it's a little bit easier. So I'm going to put my fabric under the foot. I've got the edge, the fold of my outer lined up with the inside, this little inside bit of my foot. And where's my pen mark? There it is. I need that to be a bit closer to the seam. Come on, Rosie. I couldn't see it at all. There we go. And check the other end. No, that's fine. That one's close. So I'm going a little bit forward of my pen mark so I can reverse back up to it. My edge of my fabric is lined up with the inside of my foot, and then I'm just going to move my needle to where I want my top stitching to be, which is, yeah, a couple of millimeters away from that folded edge, similar to how we did it on the tabs as well. So sort of with top stitching, if you do it a similar way and a similar distance throughout the whole thing that you're making, then it just sort of brings everything together, it makes it all really nice and cohesive. So a little back stitch quite slowly up to that marking that we made, and then just going to run down. If you've got fabric that isn't behaving, it's maybe a little bit slippery, then you could definitely pop in some pins along the seam. This is pressed very nicely and it's not going anywhere, so I feel comfortable that that kind of pins aren't needed. Okay, just coming up to that marking, one more stitch and back stitch, and cut your threads. Then you'll end up with something a bit like that. So neat. Let us do the other side. It's exactly the same. I think bags are such great things. How am I so? Oh no, these pins don't matter. They're just holding my fabric in place. I think bags are such nice things to make for presents, and I know you can have practical bags or you can do jazzy bags. We've got the bow bag, which actually Alma's done a sew along for. So actually I'm just lining this up. I need to move my needle to the other side of the foot. So lining up on the other side of the foot, I'm going to move my needle across. I need to go a bit further. No, a little bit further. There we go. Back. A couple of stitches to my line that I drew, and then going down this edge the same as before. But yeah, Alma did a sew along for the bow bag, and she added on little handles for straps as well. It's just gorgeous. That's such a nice present. Or things like a tote bag as well. I mean, I'm talking about presents. These are all things you can just make for yourself as well. There's no judgment here. Okay, coming up on that line, one more stitch, and then a little reverse. So then, if we close this, things are flipping around a bit. You've got two beautifully top stitch lines along your zip. It looks so neat and smart. And now we can get rid of the sewing machine. You're going to need to grab some pins, and we start the kind of construction of the bag for real. So let's get rid of these holding pins. We're going to sew this bottom edge together. So get your outer fabric only and get it right sides together. And we're going to pin 2 seams and then sew 2 seams. There's a lot of sewing where you can pin all at once and sew all at once, and you can kind of do batch sewing. You don't necessarily, like if an instruction says to pin, sew, iron, I always think if your ironing doesn't impact the next step, then I skip it, do the next bit of sewing, do as many sewing steps as I can before the ironing is the thing that I need to definitely do at that point. So it's sort of like batching all those processes together makes things quite a lot quicker. So that is one seam pinned, and we're going to sew along there. Then on the lining, it's a little bit different, because always with bag making, well, pretty much always with bag making, you need to leave a gap to turn things through to the right side. And that is usually on the lining, because what we'll do is we'll leave a gap of about 10 centimetres. What's that? Use my little seam gauge. 10 centimetres. It doesn't have to be especially in the middle, just, you know, somewhere around there that's going to be nice and easy for you to sew up afterwards. And we're going to use that gap later on to turn through, and you can either sort of top stitch, edge stitch, sort of stitch, or slip stitch it as well closed. But pretty much you'll usually need a gap at some point. So once these are pinned, do you know what? I don't trust myself not to sew that automatically, so I'm going to do double pin and double pin, and that will remind me hopefully to just sew and stop and leave that open. So let's go to the sewing machine and then do these two seams. Okay, normal foot on. Put your needle back to a normal position and your stitch length back as well. Mine was up on 3, so that is down now to 2.4. And I will sew my lining first. This is going to be the one with the gap. So we're sewing all the way along with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. So lining up with 1 or 3/8 of an inch on your needle plate. And you can whiz along the seam. So as I said, we've got tutorials on Stitch School. We also have a lot of PDF patterns, which I know is what some people really like for it, is that you can sign up and you get help sewing all the PDF patterns that are included. They might be included as part of a sort of in-depth sew along. So something like this, but with a lot more help and maybe some fitting tips or some hacks as well. Some extra value in there, or as part of a masterclass, which means that there's just kind of a lot more in there. So a lot more fitting, a lot more hacks. It's basically us spending a lot of time putting all of our knowledge into a class, so you get the most out of your sewing patterns. So that is my lining bit done, and as you can see, I've left my little 10 centimetre gap for turning through, very important. And then onto the outer, where you're just going to whiz all the way down. So if you're interested in Stitch School, there's kind of different approaches. You can subscribe, which is always the best value for money, because you just get things popping in your inbox a good few times a month, new tutorials or new classes or new patterns that we've added to the site. And that is £15 a month for everything, or £5 a month for just the tutorials. Or you can buy the classes and tutorials as a one-off as well, if you prefer. And that's quite handy if you just want help with one particular aspect, but you don't want to commit to a subscription. There we go, whilst I was waffling, I sewed that seam. And the next step is some pressing. Okay, this is where it might get it looks a bit weird, but I promise you it works. Sometimes in sewing instructions, you've just got to roll with it, and things work out in the end. We know what we're talking about, I promise. So what we're going to do is we're going to press both of these seams open. And rather than get everything involved and try and press it sort of open this way and then end up pressing stuff underneath, I'm just going to do it in a different way. So I'm going to fold back my seam allowance and press up to that seam from one side, a little bit over. I don't want to get that interfacing on my iron. And then flip it over and press the other one back, and that does the sort of same job as pressing it open. And we'll also be aligning it in a way in a little while that we can just give it a little final press as well. And then on the lining, you're going to do the same, but you've got that gap, obviously. So where that gap is, you're going to just carry on pressing over that 1 centimetre. You can do that by eye. It doesn't need to be 100% exact. Again, we're making a bag, it's not got to fit you. Ooh, this lining presses nicely. And then flip it over. And just press back the other side as well. Doo-doo. There we go. Oh, it's hot. That's hot. Okay, now's where it gets a little bit weird. So, what we want to do is open out our bag this way. So it looks like a little tube. And you're basically going to line up this seam, the zip, and then the same seam in the lining all together, and you end up with sort of 2 tubes on top of each other, for want of a better word. And hopefully you can see now you've flattened that out, how that pressing open still kind of works, even though we didn't press it open. So let's get this together. So my zip on top of my lining, no, my zip on top of my outer, and then got my lining side, and then my lining on top of my zip, all together, like so. We're going to get our little tabs that we made and line them up. So they're going to go on the outer, in the outer tube, and you're going to center them over that seam here. So I'm going to fold that in half. You want the raw edges matching, so the zip tab, I don't think it's even a zip tab, it's just a tab, is pointing into the tube, raw edges matching, aligned over that seam. And I need some pins, hang on. Ooh. There we go, pop a pin in. And we're going to machine tack this in place. So you can kind of see, I was saying about having a heavier needle, you end up sewing through quite a few layers. So having a heavy needle will help with this. A lightweight needle would struggle going through all these layers because it's a struggle to pin. And then I'll just show you that again on the other side. So I'm folding my lining out the way, I'm kind of folding the zip side back. And I'm going to get my tab. It's just got an annoying little extra bit on there. Let me snip that off. There we go. Fold the tab in half. Line it up with right sides together. Raw edges against the edge inside the tube, so the loop is pointing inside the tube. And it's centered over that seam line, excuse me, and pop a pin through there. And then let's machine tack these in place. Okay, so I'm going to sew this very slowly, and I am going to sew it mostly with the hand wheel, I think. If I undo this zip, hopefully I can fold this fabric out of the way and you might be able to see a little bit easier. So I've got my zip tab here. It is super chunky. Do you know what I'm going to do? Is I'm going to get some of my spare fabric and I'm going to make what we call a hump jumper. Bear with me. Okay, so I've got a scrap of my fabric and I'm actually going to fold that up so it's a similar width as this tab, and I'm going to put it next to the tab. And we're not going to sew this fabric at all, but we're just going to use it to support the foot. Because, for example, if I put my foot there, you can see how it's angling up and it's going to struggle to get up onto that zip tab. So I'm just going to put this bit of fabric right next to the zip tab, like so. And that is just supporting the edge of the foot. And we're not going to sew onto it, but hopefully you can see it's just makes the job for the machine a little bit easier. And I'm going to use the hand wheel to just put my needle in first of all. And we're just sewing this within the 1 centimetre seam allowance that we'll be sewing this final seam with, so it's just holding it in place. But just using the hand wheel, that hump jumper means that the machine is handling it really nicely. Once I've got a few stitches in, I'm going to take that pin out, because actually I think it'll do more harm than good. Might be brave and use the foot just a little bit. That's it, real slow. And holding onto it quite tightly with my hands there, just so it doesn't move around. And then close to the end, I'm just going to back stitch, because this is likely how you might pick up your bag. So you want that line of stitching to be really nice and strong. There we go, I've cut my threads. This guy really helped. And that is now attached there. So let's do the same with the other one. You might not be able to see as clearly because I can't peel away the fabric as much here. But I'm just doing that same process. So get my little hump jumper. You can buy hump jumpers. I think they're just little bits of plastic that fit really nicely under a foot. But honestly, a roll of fabric does the job perfectly. Okay. So foot in, foot down, needle in. Just going to do a couple of stitches by hand. There we go. Once I'm kind of happy that's in place, I'm taking this needle out. And oh, my foot's not even down. It's so bulky it looked like it was. There we go. Gently go. Just basically just one stitch at a time. My machine did not like that. There we go. So I'm just going to use my hand wheel now. Sometimes if you use your foot, if your machine doesn't like it, actually just use your hand wheel and it's fine. And then I'm just going to go backwards, see if it will handle it with my foot. And literally doing one stitch at a time. It seems okay. Oh, it feels quite tense. Thrilling sewing. Okay, forward again, just for a couple of stitches. And it didn't like it again. It must be a little tricky spot there. But that is fine. That's where I'm going to stop. And pull it off the machine. And there we can see that that is nicely stitched in place there. So now we're going to sew these edges. And you've just got to be a bit careful because obviously you've got a lot of stuff going on. So let's get our tubes back into position. I'm going to close that zip again so it's a bit more solid. So again, we're going to do the zip centered on our little tabs. And we're going to pin along this edge. This is where I messed up my interfacing. But you can see it's going to be hidden inside the bag. It's fine. It's totally fine. So some pins along there. What you can also do is sort of pin your lining fabric well out of the way as well. So I'm just going to chuck a pin in there. Ooh. And I've got these little bits that we didn't sew. This is why we left that 1.3, so we could sew these two, so we could sew the outer and the lining separately. So I'm just going to literally pop a pin in and pin those out of the way too. So all the way along here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to sew down here with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. This is where I've got my zip that's bigger. Because this is plastic, I'm actually going to sew all the way and straight across there. I'll talk through it when I'm sewing as well, but be careful. Obviously you've got a lot of layers here now because you've got the zip and the tab as well. So I'm going to use my hand wheel to go across there. If my zip was the perfect length and I had this little metal bit here, then I would want to be really aware of that, because you're not going to be able to sew through that. And I'd probably mark on with my marker where that is, and I would literally sew up to that bit and then stop and then sew on the other side as well, leaving that tiny gap. If you do a little back stitch either side, that's going to be absolutely fine, but you don't want to risk sewing over that. So that's that end. And actually, can we do both at once? I think we can. So it's very handy that my lining's so soft and malleable, because that can just folds up to nothing. That's out the way. I'm going to pull this zip pull down, but at the end with the zip pull, you want to make sure that you're sewing, when you're sewing across this bit, the ends of your zip tape are nicely close together. You don't want them to have a big gap. So I'm going to line them up. One more pin to keep this bit of fabric out of the way. Whoop, there we go. Line them up really nicely, and I think what might be easier, rather than a pin going through all those layers, is a pin very close by, but on the bit with less fabric. So that's close together, and then next to it, a pin that's going to hold that in place. I don't know about you, but you always find one duff pin that makes it into my pin dish, and I keep picking it up, and you put it down because you don't want to use it, and you always pick it up next. I'm going to take this one out of the equation. Soz mate, he's going to go down there. Use my good pins. I don't know how they find their way in. Or if you've got one needle in your pin dish, then you constantly pick it up when you want pins. When there's like 100 pins, if you want to find a needle, you're never going to pick it up. Anyway, right, let's go to the sewing machine and let's sew these two edges. Okay, so 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'm going to start with the end of my zip. So lining up with 1 centimetre or 5/8 of an inch. I'm going to back stitch off the end. I'm just sewing along like normal, and just when we're going to get close to the zip tape, do you know what, I'm going to get our old friend out. Get our old friend the hump jumper, just in case we need him. And I'm going to keep going, but it's nice and slow. You can also use a zip foot on this seam if you like, because if you've got a bulkier lining than I have, this might be quite a lot of fabric here, and a zip foot would mean you get nice and close, but it would also not worry about your foot getting in the way. So I am going to lift my foot up, and I'm not going to fold it quite as much, but I'm just putting some pressure on the front of the foot and seeing if I can slip that under there, just to give it a little bit more stability. Because my needle's in, this isn't going anywhere. And I'm going to swap over to my trusty hand wheel. I am using a little bit of force to push this through, because it is a lot to ask of my sewing machine. So going over the plastic teeth, remember, if you've got a metal bit there, this is where you might end your seam, do a little back stitch, and then start again on the other side. Or if you've got metal teeth, definitely do the same as well. But you can sew over plastic teeth, that's usually absolutely fine. I wouldn't recommend whizzing over it, but like this is absolutely fine. So, ooh, it doesn't want to go down there. So what you can do is just foot up and move just like not even a millimetre, there we go. I don't even know what measurement that would be, a tiny measurement. And again, it's just hitting something that it won't go over. And there we go, that's fine. And then foot properly down again, and we're off to the end. And a good back stitch on those corners. So that's all sewn nicely there. And then the other side, so this time we're dealing with the open end of the zip, because I moved the zip pull just to kind of stop it being bulky and in the way. So back stitch, whiz along. My zip tape definitely looks like it's pulled open a little bit, so I'm going to use these fingers to hold that in place. But thinking about it, I might need that hand for some hand wheel action. So let's see how we go. I'm going to get close. I'm going to get Mr. Hump Jumper in, foot up, pop him underneath, foot down again, and okay. So this hand I'm going to use to keep my zip tape closed, because I am going to use the hand wheel. I can resist pressing with my foot. I can feel my foot just going ahead and pressing. So take your foot off the pedal when you're using the hand wheel, because it's too easy to just press it. And often with this sort of work, you're using your hand really close to the needle, so it is better to try and keep away from that foot pedal, just in case. But it is nicely going over this side. Do you know what, just as I said that, it wouldn't do it. Okay, we've got a little fiddly bit, so I'm just going to move it, oh, just the tiniest amount. Nope. Until I find a spot that the needle will come back down on. Oop, there we go. And we're off, we're off. So we're just going to do the exact same thing now, but on the lining. And hopefully, like mine, your lining will be a little bit lighter, so it'll probably be an easier job. Oh, do you know what I've done? I've sewn my hump jumper to my bag. Always need an unpicker. Just going to unpick that. There we go. He's free now. Okay, so release your lining. And at this point, I think I'm right in saying that you want to make sure your zip is a little bit open, because we're going to need that later. So I'm just going to reach my hand inside and just open my zip a little bit more, because we're going to turn through this hole, but we're also going to turn through the zip as well. And if your zip is completely closed, you might be able to jimmy it from the inside there, but it'll be much easier if it's open. But okay, same process. But this time we're going to flip over to this side, and we're going to fold our fabric out of the way. And actually this time I might use a zip foot, I think, because I'm going to have to get really close to this without sewing it. And it is bulky. Okay, let's fold these guys back. And this is a case, when things are this bulky, if I was to try and pin that out of the way, you can see that looks like a bit of a nightmare. So I might leave that as it is and just handle that whilst I'm sewing. Sometimes pins can be your best friend, but sometimes it's sort of easier without them. So in this case, I think I'll navigate it as I go. Okay, so we're lining up this short edge, making sure your seam is on top of the zip. There we go. And then folding this edge out. Pop some pins in there. And the same on the other side. Actually, I think my fabric's caught a little bit here on this seam. Bear with me. I don't know if you can see, it's caught up here. It's actually caught where I've just been sewing. So I might have to sew that again. I'll fix that, because I just need to release this lining fabric. There we go, so just pop these together, but remember you're only pinning the lining, not the outer. It is fiddly. That's why we've got that 1.3 that we left open, and you're sewing at a 1 centimetre seam allowance. And I'm just going to put my pin parallel at that point. That seems easier to do for me. Okay. And then we'll do the same at the other end. So make sure you've got your bits of lining that are free. You can line those up with that seam. I'm actually going to leave this long zip for a while because it's quite helpful to pull back. You're not dealing with a little bit if you've got a long zip like me. But again, when I'm lining up that seam, I'm just going to put those parallel. There. And there. So they're lined up there. And then we can just pin the rest. I'm just going to hold it like this, it's a little bit easier. And again, sewing this with a 1 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, let's sew this nice and slowly. And like I said, I am going to move on to a zip foot, so I can try and get close to, as close as possible. So I'm going to move my needle right over to the edge. Let's start with this end first. So doing this, you don't have to worry about going over a zip because a zip isn't attached to the lining. So it's not bulk you have to worry about, it's sort of handling this chunky bit here. So let's start with a reverse. And then going forward, nice and easy, until I come up to this bit. It's probably quite tricky to see, but I'm just going to hold back that real chunky bit with my fingers, and I'm just keeping an eye on where my needle is going. So at this point, really, we've said you've got a 1 centimetre seam allowance, but all you want to do is to try and sew as close to where the lining is attached to the zip as possible. If it's not 1 centimetre, don't worry. You just want to try and get snug to that. So yeah, at this point, you kind of always keep your eye on the line that your edge of your fabric is lined up with, but actually I'm going to say at this point, just keep an eye on where your needle's going, and that none of this is getting caught, and that you're sewing as close as you can to it. Also, this bit is going to be on the inside of your bag. It really won't be seen, and all it means is maybe a tiny bit more of the zip gets seen or doesn't get seen, so do not stress too much. Okay, onto the other side. Again, 1 centimetre seam allowance. Oh, the only thing with having a zip foot on is it's not grabbing my very light fabric very nicely at the start. But don't worry too much about that, because actually these corners we're going to cut off. So this time I've got a longer zip. You might have that, you might not. The longer zip is a bit easier to hold back like that. So it's not always a bad thing to not have the exact length zip. Sometimes you can use it to your favour. Again, I'm coming up really close, and I'm just taking these pins out kind of as late as I can. And it is a fiddly bit of sewing, but I have faith. Real nice and slow. Ooh, this bit of fabric's just gone above my foot when I want it under it. Go on, mate. There we go, he's back underneath. And you can also always help your machine along as well. So sometimes we use a pin. So I've got my pin actually on my lining side, helping my lining. I've got my hands on this side and they're helping it across as well. Real slow at that point. There we go. Phew. I think that's the trickiest bit. So that is the trickiest bit done. So take out any pins you've got in there and you'll have something that looks like this. So you've got your two tubes. You've got your lining one, which you can see this has been sewn across here. This is not perfectly straight here. I'm not bothered about that. It was fiddly. You won't notice that when it's all the right way around, so don't worry. This one, not too bad. And then the other side as well, you've got the same thing here. What we are going to do now transforms it from the kind of flat shape that you see here into the boxy shape of the Boxy Toiletries Bag name. So at this point, I'm actually going to get rid of that bit of my zip. It's served its purpose. Because I've sewn over the edge of it, there's no way, obviously you've snipped the zip stop off, but there's no way that zip's coming off because it's completely enclosed. So that is totally fine. So to create the boxy nature of the Boxy Toiletries Bag, you're going to need your seam gauge again. You're going to need a pen. And we're going to be measuring 5.5 centimetres. Side onto 5.5. And what we're going to do is create a box in all of these corners that is 5.5 by 5.5, and we're going to chop into it. You want your 5.5 to measure up from the folded edge and up from the seam line that you've just sewn, so that when we fold them together they are equal. So I'm just going to put a couple of markings in and line up this way. There we go, that's my cross mark there. So that's 5.5 and 5.5 there. And you want to do this on all of your corners. And just whilst I'm doing this, I can tell you about a few other things. I think, like I said at the start, we always have offers on our website, so you can see in the description box what we've got going on for the Boxy Toiletries Bag at the moment. But we do have free patterns as well, so if you want to have a go at sewing a sew over it pattern, but oh, I almost did that wrong. If you want to have a go at sewing a sew over it pattern, but you don't want to commit yet, then you can definitely do that, because we've got a couple of patterns that you can get for free from our website, just by signing up to our newsletter. So if you sign up to our newsletter, you can get the Annie blouse and the Ruby skirt for free. And both of these have Stitch School workshops. So you can kind of see the Stitch School vibe without committing. So I believe Lisa teaches the first Stitch School workshop on the Annie blouse, which is like a really nice, easy blouse with no closures, just a little bit of shirring at the front, which gives it a little bit of something. And then you've got the Ruby skirt, which is an elasticated waist skirt with buttons down the front. And I teach that workshop as well. And the workshops are all for free on our website, so you can have a look at those. And they will just give you a sort of idea of how Stitch School works. You can see if you like the way we do things, if maybe you think you'd enjoy a bit of online learning as well. It's a really good way to dip your toe in the water. So you want to mark in all of these squares. I'll just show you on the outer what we're going to do next, and then I'll do it on the lining as well. I thought they'd disappeared, but obviously they're on the other side. Mark in all your squares, and then we're going to cut into them, which feels quite scary, but I promise it's the right thing to do. And just cut along the lines that you've just sewn and get rid of these little corners. So go ahead and cut through these. Remember that you're measuring your 5.5 from the folded edge and from the seam line, because that means that they will match later on when we sew them. And you want to do this for your lining as well. Okay, so your bag is going to look something a little bit like this. All your corners are out on both the lining and the outer. And then we're going to sew these together, which might not make sense, but let me show you. So you're going to grab one corner at a time, and you're going to fold it so it's flat like this. Take the inner corners and bring them out so that you can sit it together like that. And at the same time, you're going to hold that seam allowance open. So I am going to start by putting my pin right across that seam allowance so that sits open. And basically that seam should match up with the folded edge. And these corners should quite nicely match. And you're going to do that on all 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 of these corners. So let's do that again. So it's flat like this. And I'm going to take those inner corners, bring those together, open up that seam, pop a pin across there first, and probably a pin at either side as well. Try it on a lining one, on a floaty one. So it's flat, inner corners. Open those inner corners out. You look so weird right now. Open that seam allowance. And pin that in place. So go ahead. It can be easier to do all your outer and then all your lining. However you want to do it. Pin as many as you want, and then we will sew them and you'll see that boxy shape come to life. Okay, I'm ready to sew my outer corners. I'm going to go back to my regular machine foot and back to my regular needle position. I forgot the words there. So we got these pinned and we're going to sew. This is our raw edge now. We're going to sew that with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, or 3/8 of an inch if you're an inches person. I'm going to put my needle in and get rid of that first pin. This is like the final seam that's going to be quite integral on the outside, so I'm going to make sure I back stitch it really securely and right up and over that fold, just so it looks really nice from the outside. Keep that seam allowance open as you sew over it, and then right to the end and back stitch again really nicely. And that is what your boxiness is going to look like. Let's do one more together. So 1 centimetre seam allowance, needle in, first pin out, a good back stitch. My seam allowance is actually on the underside here, so I'm just making sure that that is pressed open nicely whilst I go over that. And then a good reverse at the end. So you want to repeat that for all 8 of your corners, and kind of as with everything, you just want to make sure whilst you're sewing that your outer and your lining stays completely separate. You're not catching them together. They need to be independent at this point. So go ahead and sew all those, and then I think we might be at the magical turning through point. This is what we've got. It looks a little bit nuts, but you can see it's now got a shape, which is really nice. So I'm just going to go around. We're going to turn it through, but I like knowing it's all neat on the inside. So I'm just going to go around and trim any big threads that are sort of sticking in the way. And then we're going to make use of that hole we left in the lining, she says, there it is, to turn it all the way through. So reach inside the hole, and start to pull the bag through. This is why, you'll see why you need the zip to be open at this point. I'm just going to pull it and open it even more. And 10 centimetres might seem like quite a lot, but it can still be a little fiddly. So I'm just pulling through the outer first, and then the lining will follow. Got our first tab. There she is. It's affectionately called birthing a bag. I think you'll probably understand why. There we go. It's all starting to come around to the right side. Da, 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 da. Okay, let's give it a poke in the right direction. So those corners that we've just sewn have now created these seams, which you can see just give it that really nice boxy shape. You've got your tab there to hold on to. Get into those corners and push those out. You kind of don't need to press them, I don't think. I think having them a bit softer makes the shape nicer, a little bit more rounded, because you don't want it pressed edged along here. You want it quite nice and soft. Oh my God, I love it. Let's have a look. So again, I'm going to go around with my scissors and snip off any bits of thread that are showing. I've still got here, you can see my marks from my when we initially did that little bit of leaving 1.3 at the start, but a little iron will get rid of those. So I kind of don't want to do the final look yet. I'm going to turn it to the inside and do the same. Just make sure the inside's looking nice. You can see where you did that tricky bit going over the zip there, but all it does is frame that zip really nicely. And again, if yours isn't perfect, it's on the inside, no one will know. I think that's what a lot of people tend to do with sewing, is point out their mistakes immediately. Like if someone says, oh, I love your top, you'll be like, oh yeah, but this is wrong, or this is wrong, or this is wrong. I think we all need to do a bit less of that and be very proud of making things instead. So no one's going to be looking at the tiny junction between your zip and your lining in your Boxy Toiletries bag. Just be proud of it. So our last bit of sewing is just to close up this hole on the lining. So there's two ways to do this. You can pinch it together like that, and you can edge stitch along, or you can slip stitch. I really like hand stitching, so I'm going to slip stitch today. And also, that is partially because my thread is yellow, and because I thought it was more important to match the outer than the lining. And I don't have navy thread for my machine at the moment, so let's slip stitch instead. So I'm just going to wet the end of my thread a little bit just to help it go through the needle. There we go. And then pop a knot in the end. Fab. And I'm going to go inside and come up in the fold of the seam, but like a little bit where I have sewn the seam. So I'm going to give myself like a little bit of a head start, if that makes sense. So I'll sew a little bit where I have machine sewn. So once that's in place, I'm just going to pop that to the side. Then I'm going to get a pin just to hold this together. Maybe two, I think. And all I'm going to do is pop my needle into each folded side at a time. So a bit into one side and then directly into the other. So into the top fold, and then in one fell swoop going into the bottom fold as well. And that is a slip stitch, and it's just a really nice, almost invisible. If my thread was the same colour, this would be invisible. But again, on the inside of my toiletries bag, if someone sees a bit of yellow thread, well, lucky for them, because they'll be snooping around in my stuff. Let's see. Put that through. I've got a little knot in my thread. There we go. I think maybe I made my thread too long. I probably didn't need this much. I was overzealous. But yeah, have a think what you're going to use your toiletries bag for. As I said, I think mine's going to be a knitting bag. But it could be for so many things. I was thinking as well of doing one in maybe a waxed fabric on the inside, and then that will really make it amazing for toiletries because it will be waterproof. That'll be really nice. But also another way to elevate it would be to do a bit of quilting. I love a bit of quilting. I don't always have the patience to do big quilts, but you could quilt a piece of fabric either by doing a bit of patchwork or by just having a piece of fabric that you then put onto some batting and sew across and sew the batting and the fabric together. So then you get that quilted effect. And all you'd need to do would be to quilt the outer piece. You don't even have to quilt with 3 layers. You could just do 2 because the other side would be covered by your lining. And that would be adorable. It would make a really nice bag for sewing supplies as well. Maybe almost too big, but for things like your big scissors and chunkier sewing supplies, or if you're bringing a little project on holiday. How nice does that sound? Do a bit of sewing on holiday. I'm actually going to Shetland this year, so maybe what I will do is put all my knitting projects for Shetland in this, and then I can sit and have a cup of tea and knit from my bag. I think that sounds quite delightful. Okay, I'm just coming to the end of that seam. I'm not pulling my stitches too tight. They're quite, not loose. Loose is the wrong word. They're just neat. They're just neat and nice. So I'm just going to do a couple of anchoring stitches. That just means I'm just going to do basically a couple of stitches on top of each other. And then one with a knot in. And then I'm actually going to post my needle into the inside of my lining and bring it up somewhere random. Pull that through. It seems odd, but then if I snip my thread really close there and shimmy my bag, that length of thread is now hidden inside, and that bottom bit of my bag is all closed up. Let's turn it through. And here you go. Actually, bear with me one second because I feel like this needs a proper demonstration. I've got my knitting project. Let's see it in action. So, this is my beautiful toiletries bag / knitting bag. And I'm really pleased with it. It's got this gorgeous bespoke Atelier brunette lining, fantastic canvas for the outside, zip it up, and you've got this gorgeous boxy shape. Look at that. It's such a nice little project. It only takes you a couple of hours in an afternoon. You can sew along with me. There hopefully should be no tricky bits now. And also it's perfect for my knitting project, just like that. So hopefully this has given a bit of inspiration to go and sew your own Boxy Toiletries bag or dive into bag making in a whole. It's not as scary as you think, I promise. If there's any other tutorials or sew-alongs you'd like to see from us, then definitely let us know below. We're always interested in what people want to see. Obviously, if you like our videos, we do a lot more than sew-alongs. I've been talking about sew-alongs a lot in this video, but we do a lot of, we do team makes, we introduce our new patterns, we chat a lot about fitting. There's 4 of us in our team and we all wear quite different styles and we fit ourselves quite differently, and we quite often do videos where we compare and contrast what we've done in fitting as well, which I find really interesting, and we have it on good authority that people find that interesting to listen to as well, and it might help you with your fitting journey. So there's so much on the Sew Over It channel for you to have a look at. So if you do like our videos, then definitely give this one a like. You can subscribe to our channel so you know as soon as one pops up that we've got a new video for you. And also, if you do like our content, we'd really appreciate if you could use the link below to drop us a little coffee, because that really helps, and it all goes towards making so much more exciting content. So hopefully I'll see you again soon for another sew along. Bye.